Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 6th of December. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can find that anytime by calling 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. And when you can't find what you're looking for, feel free to send me an email at david.snider@noaa.gov. Let's take a look at what's going on around your part of Alaska. Winter weather advisories and wind advisories continue across the region today. We're looking at some of those across the Denali and the Alaska range. Wind gusts there coming out of the south up to about 60 miles per hour should be expected. That will continue tonight and into tomorrow. A look out to the west shows winter weather advisories are in effect. This is generally going to be east of Sleet Mute and up toward the mountains there around Lake Iliamna. Looks like a band of snow is going to set up there, and you'll probably see a solid 3 to 5, even 8 inches of snow in some of those higher amounts, generally east again of mostly half of this area. Everything west is not going to be part of this winter weather advisory. So that part looks a lot worse than it is. That's good news there. Let's take a look up north. Winter weather advisories continue all the way along the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range through Bettles, all the way out toward the middle and upper Koyukuk valleys and into the Yukon Valley. And then for the Seward Peninsula on the north side and on the south side, winter weather advisories are expected there for several inches of snow. And along the Chukchi Coast, winter storm warnings are in effect for the western end of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. And as we were talking about yesterday, the focus for this winter event will certainly be around this entire region, but we're really going to focus on the low pressure effects for areas right here along the coastline because that's where the wind is going to be. And it looks like this weather system is going to drag in a really hefty amount of north winds. Those winds are shifting now from the northeast to the north, and it looks like those could gust on the order of 60 to 70 miles per hour. So right now, visibility will go down. It is snowing and will continue to snow. And it looks like we'll be, looking at a pretty decent winter storm, but probably not a blizzard. Well, that's still pretty good news as far as the technical terms go, but the real results are it's going to be kind of a long-term winter storm for you out there around the Bering Strait in Gamble and Savunga, and really with kind of the leftover amounts making their way to Hooper Bay and up the Yukon Delta coastline, into Nome and into the interior of the Seward Peninsula and in the west. You're still going to be dealing with very choppy surf conditions. There's not enough sea ice there to break that up just yet or limit that. And you're going to be dealing with snow and wind for at least today, tonight, and into tomorrow. So plan on a pretty healthy and long-lived winter storm in that region. As always, you can check the latest radar picture out of Nome. You can check the webpage and the Alaska Weather Information Line. We'll have the very latest forecast updates for you there. The red areas in this case, winter storm warning. Yellow areas, winter weather advisories for continued areas of light snow, wind, and poor visibility. Let's take a look at this on the satellite picture. And you can see this broad area of low pressure here spiraling in. The center of circulation is just north and east of Gamble and St. Lawrence Island heading out toward Nome. You can see the front clearly defined on the sharp edge of the satellite picture, just about ready to make it into Nome. So the snow has been falling in that region pretty much all day long. As you look further south of Kodiak, also a fairly healthy area of low pressure. The clouds spreading out to the north and east, we call this a baroclinic leaf on the satellite picture is what that formation is. The clouds are spreading out and away from that frontal boundary and the broad area of lift out ahead of it. Out across parts of the central and eastern interior, a lot of cloud cover making its way through there. Sun breaking out across some parts of southwestern Alaska there today. Must have been nice to see. And the central and western part of the chain also filling in with clouds already. Up north, plenty of low clouds across the north slope. It looks like for the next couple days you'll be dealing with more of a southerly flow making it up and over the Brooks Range. However, temperatures are not going to be terribly warm. You'll see a lot of cloud cover as a result of that. As we'll see a little bit further south, coming northward in the next couple days is a pretty potent storm. This one's going to work its way right up the southeastern coastline. So the cloud-free day that you've had in some parts today, there has been rain in the northern half, will quickly fill in as we head into tomorrow, and especially tomorrow night and into Saturday. A very fast-moving and strong storm is going to work its way up the outer coast. You're likely going to see storm warnings, and you're likely going to have some pretty strong gusts across the inside passage. It does look like a generally warm storm, but there certainly will be some snow added to the higher terrain there. In the meantime, warm weather continues around south central. In fact, so warm that sleet and freezing rain are falling right now across the Anchorage area. We painted that little sliver there in pink. And it looks like freezing rain advisory will be in effect at least into the early evening hours around the region. Rain is falling right now for many parts of Prince William Sound and the Kenai Peninsula. We've got snow up across the higher terrain. Freezing rain fell around Haines today, as we understand it as well, so not quite the weather you'd like to see in wintertime. 985 millibar low is sitting at around the Bering Strait. That certainly catches your attention as well, and we put on those crossed arrows. That means blowing snow is occurring. That limits visibility, so not just snow falling from the sky, but also blowing around because of the wind. And with that winter storm warning, that should be expected to continue as we go forward. The low pressure system is expected to drop to about 978 millibars as we head through tonight. With that, we expect snow to spread southward into the Yukon Delta, wrapping around into the middle Koyukuk Valley, areas up north, and into the Seward Peninsula, just covering up the entire region with wind and snow. The western and northern side of this, where the pressure gradient is tighter, you can see those bands of black tightening up there. That tells us there's a very great pressure differential in that region, and because of that, the wind has to, it's ordered to, it's the law, it has to move faster because of that great difference in pressure from the low to that very cold high that's coming out of Siberia. And yes, that cold air is already spreading southward. It looks like even more of that is going to be pushing southward in the coming days into the central and western Bering, and eventually, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually some of that is going to creep its way into more parts of the mainland as we go maybe into next week and the week after that. So there's a lot of potential for this entire region to cool off, but it has been a terribly warm winter for most parts of Alaska just about all winter long. Really different stuff. So low pressure is the main driver for us today, and you can see that warmth spreading northward. The red arrow, the red line here is a warm front. As that pushes northward, it will also focus a band of snow across some parts of the northern interior, and that's all coming out of this pretty much southeasterly flow across the Gulf of Alaska. And you'll notice central and southern parts of southeast have not had a whole lot of precipitation in this pattern recently. That's gradually going to change as this next weather maker creeps eastward. And remember, I said there was a fast-moving part of the system that just magically appears, comes up out of the south at 973 millibars. It will be a force to be reckoned with, especially in the eastern Gulf. This looks like it will produce at least high-end gales and likely storm-force winds across the outer coast and really all the way into the northern Gulf. This is also going to push in some more precipitation for central and southern southeast. Places like Ketchikan likely looking at some more rain. And for some areas in the Northernland Canal, this is going to likely start as that maybe a wintry mix, but it looks like the warm air will win. And you probably end up with rain once again as we get into the end of Friday. For South Central, very unsettled, 977 millibar low, parked very close to Kodiak Island. Snow for the higher terrain. It does look like rainfall for some areas along the lower terrain there. And for some of the eastern Alaska range, wind and snow will continue for you. The low pressure system out around St. Lawrence Island and the western end of Norton Sound sits at 978 millibars. The strongest winds across the Chukchi Sea, through the Bering Strait and down towards St. Matthew. Some of that really starts to kind of filter out as it gets down to the Pribilofs. And our warm front is still hovering along the banks of the Brooks Range. That is forcing that south wind right up into the terrain. It's going to snow and continue to snow there for a while. And once again, we've got our blowing snow indicators there all the way wrapped around this storm. Snow showers will be found out across the central and western chain and along the Alaska Peninsula there. A lot of that, though, a lot more showery in nature and not nearly as intense as what we're seeing up here around the core of the storm. Here's Saturday, and low pressure in the eastern Gulf is organized now a little bit further east of Kodiak Island, moved west away from the southeastern regions. But you'll notice that pressure gradient is so tight. Look at that. High pressure's out across the western U.S. and is just trying to fill the void here by this low pressure system in the Gulf. Because of that, there is going to be a tremendous lot of wind working through southeast. So Friday night and Saturday are going to quite literally blow in the region. For the higher terrain, areas of snow should be expected. Some of that's going to wrap its way into south central, Anchorage, certainly the Parks Highway with a frontal boundary right on top of the road system. And it looks like rain and snow may be possible for some of the lower terrain around the middle Tanana Valley. A frontal boundary parked around the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range will focus snowfall there. We still have wind, we still have snow, and we still have a lot of cold working its way southward on the west side of that system. But wait, there's more. 962 millibar low coming into the western Bering there will create areas of rain and snow for the central and western chain, and then the wraparound cold, wraparound wind here signals a change across the western Bering, so it's going to be fairly unsettled out west of most of the mainland. This, of course, will be brought into the weather picture as we get into Sunday and Monday. So an awful lot going on. Wind, rain, snow, just for about every corner of Alaska. Southwest may be one of the spots where it's not quite as bad as we get into the rest of the week. So pay attention to the weather, folks. It's going to count this time. Here's how it looks for Friday morning. For southeast, 20s and 30s for most locations. Sitka, one of the warmer spots at 31. Haines and Skagway in the low 30s. Ketchikan and Annette and Petersburg all in the upper 20s. For Prince William Sound, upper 30s to mid 40s. Cordova, nearly 45, 42 in Kodiak, easy for me to say. And Cook Inlet, hovering very close to that freezing point for the overnight temperatures now, lower 30s there. Teens for Eagle, looks like Northway, 6 below. Middle Tanana Valley around Fairbanks, 12, 6 in Fort Yukon. Anywhere from 5 to 15 below across the North Slope. Around Shishmaref, 16 degrees. Nome, 23, about the same for St. Lawrence Island again, under a winter storm warning. Teens and 20s for most of southwestern Alaska. Bristol Bay, closer to 30. Mid to upper 30s for most of the Alaska Peninsula, and 28 in St. Paul with a high of 31 for your Friday afternoon. South Central and Kodiak Island in the mid to upper 30s, even low 40s there as you get out toward Kodiak. Upper 30s and lower 40s for most of southeast. Sitka trying to stay on the warm side at 45. Yakutat 43. Juneau near 40 degrees. 8 in Northway, 22 for Eagle, 17 in Fort Yukon. Ambler and Bettles in the teens and 20s there, 11 for Arctic Village. For North Slope temperatures anywhere from 5 to as cold as 15 below, 17 around Kotzebue, 20s for most of southwestern Alaska. It doesn't look like many locations will get above freezing. Bethel closer to 24, and nearly 40 for most of the Alaska Peninsula. St. Paul about 31 degrees, 38 around Adak.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to aviation weather now. IFR is going to be fairly widespread around St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait and the south-facing coast of the Seward Peninsula and northward into outer parts of Kotzebue Sound and also across some of the western and central chain. You'll notice IFR across the western Alaska Range into Kodiak, the southern parts of Cook Inlet and Barren Islands and the northern sections of Prince William Sound. For east and southeast, we expect to see building areas of MVFR, but notice that VFR is not completely gone just yet, so you still have some possibilities to move around fairly freely and easily on Friday. Notice that the Chilkoot White Pass probably start out at MVFR. You'll see improvements there Friday afternoon, but the main focus for visibility and ceiling concerns are going to shift out over the Gulf and really expand out around Prince William Sound, the northern Gulf, Kodiak Island, Cook Inlet, and creeping their way up through the Kenai Peninsula. South-facing slopes of the Brooks Range should be looking at IFR, as well as most of west and parts of southwestern Alaska out towards St. Matthew Island, St. Lawrence Island as well, and then the windward side of the Alaska Peninsula to the eastern chain. As we get into your Saturday morning, that region kind of improves a little bit, but you'll look at IFR spreading north of Adigan and Anaktuvuk Pass, southward all the way down to the Alaska Range, and then wrapping into the north and eastern Gulf along the higher train of southeast, with MVFR slowly going away across southern parts of southeast. MVFR should be expected around the capital city and north, and then around Nunivak Island west toward the Pribilofs and the eastern chain. Then see a little break or two there, and IFR conditions are expected across the western Aleutians. Look for IFR to increase on Saturday afternoon for the North Slope and into the upper Koyukuk Valley. Parts of the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island may see improvements to marginal conditions there. Southwest looking at widespread marginal into Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. Most of South Central at least marginal, and many areas will become IFR, including Anchorage down through Turnagain Arm, Portage Pass, and eastward through Prince William Sound to the outer coast of southeast, with lingering areas of hit and miss VFR for southeast. It looks like most of the region will at least flirt with marginal levels through your Saturday afternoon. Anaktuvuk Pass, we expect to see VFR. It looks like Adigan Pass for your Friday, probably holding at VFR as well, but that's probably a one-day sale. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass expected to be IFR really all day long. Rainy Pass turning over to instrument flight rule as you get it through Friday. Windy Pass marginal levels. IFR expected to be found in Isabel in the morning with improvements toward marginal levels throughout the day. And we'll start at VFR but lean over toward marginal levels in Mentasta Pass. Toneda Pass holds at marginal levels as we go through your Friday. Portage Pass, instrument flight rule all day long, and that should continue as we get into your Saturday as well. And Chilkoot and White Pass, you saw marginal at least for Friday, and probably some changes there on Saturday. A lot of warm air has been building across the central and eastern Gulf. This is moving north and west, but low pressure out across the Bering Strait is going to grab an awful lot of cold air and push that southward. So expect to watch the surface freezing line moving south as we get into your Friday. Levels for places like southern southeast and Kodiak Island and even maybe Homer are going to hold around 2 to about 4,000 feet for Friday and again on Saturday. Your icing potential will reflect similar trends as well. Levels are climbing to about 7,000 to 8,000 feet for the Gulf as that warmer air is rushing in. The moisture is also a little bit higher up, so isolated moderate should be found around the north and eastern Gulf through the western Alaska range. But as you get into the interior and northward, those levels come down to about 2 to somewhere around 4,000 feet. You can see even lower levels around St. Lawrence Island. But one thing that will mitigate icing, probably the extreme and efficient production of snow that's going to occur here around the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. So take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, but isolated moderate icing potential is certainly there across some of our north and western communities. The jet stream is showing a vigorous Pacific flow coming in out of Asia, about 150 to 135 knots, descending into the Gulf, and then really pushing in a strong southerly flow across the central and eastern Gulf. You can see a little bit of convergence here, that southerly flow over the mainland going strong around 50 to 65 knots and opening the door to colder air spilling in from high pressure, barely seen under the banner there. That's coming in from north and eastern Asia. At 9,000 feet, a broad southerly flow is certainly in place, 50 to 60 knots there across south central. Southeast also gearing up for a much stronger storm in the east with winds at 40 to 50 knots at this level. Westerlies for the north slope and northwesterlies continue for the central and eastern Bering Sea. You can see those winds coming up to about 55 knots west of the Bering Strait. Strong southerlies are ramping up 20 to 25 there, and wind speeds across outer parts of southeast anywhere from 45 to about 60 knots from the south and east, with several areas of low pressure organizing and strengthening. One of those right over the Barren Islands at 50 knots. Turbulence is going to focus on the northern Gulf as we go throughout your Friday. Below 8,000 feet, there is potential for isolated severe, widespread considerable moderate, and also looking at moderate to severe across parts of the Bering Strait.
Phase-tastic, Part 1.
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're here to help you find your way around the night sky. Hey Dean, if the moon rises at noon, what phase is it in?
Oh, that's easy. It would be at first quarter.
Very good.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, you're probably saying to yourself, how could the answer to that question be that easy?
Well, we're going to show you how you can tell approximately what time the moon will rise by what phase it's in.
Sweet. Let's show you. Unlike the sun, the moon does not give off its own light. It simply reflects light from the sun. So, as the moon travels around the Earth, we see sunlight reflecting off the daytime side of the moon. The dark portion that we can't see is the nighttime side of the moon, also known as the dark side of the moon. The dark side of the moon is sometimes confused for the far side of the moon, which is the side that always faces away from the Earth.
The changing patterns of daylight and darkness that we see on the moon are called phases. It takes about a week for the moon to go from one major phase to the next. For example, when the moon is between the Earth and Sun, we are facing the nighttime side, so the moon's surface isn't visible to us. We call this phase new moon, and it's considered the beginning of the moon's journey around the Earth for any given cycle.
A day or so later, the moon has moved a little further in its orbit, and we can now see a small part of the daytime side of the moon. This phase is called the crescent phase. As the days pass, we will see more and more of the daytime side and less of the nighttime side. We refer to this as waxing. Waxing means getting larger, so this phase is more precisely called a waxing crescent. When the moon has traveled a quarter of the way around the Earth, it has reached a phase called first quarter. Here's how Dean was able to answer my question so quickly. It's been a week since the moon was in its new phase, so now it's 90 degrees east of the sun in the sky. Therefore, we can now see half of the daylit side and half of the nighttime side.
That's right, James. As the Earth slowly rotates, everything in the sky appears to rise in the east and set in the west. The sun reaches its highest point in the sky at local noon. We call this crossing the meridian. So, if the moon is 90 degrees east of the sun, and if the sun is on the meridian at noon, the moon would be on the eastern horizon at noon. In other words, the moon would be rising.
Ta-da! A day or so later, the moon has now entered a phase we call gibbous. Gibbous is a Middle English word meaning hump, so the light on the moon appears a little rounded on the left side. This is also considered a waxing phase as the daylit side of the moon is still getting larger. So we call this a waxing gibbous moon.
2 weeks after the moon was in its new phase, it will have reached the halfway point in its orbit, and the entire daylit side of the moon will be visible. We call this phase full moon. Now that the moon is full, it is 180 degrees away from the sun in the sky. So when the sun sets, the full moon rises.
That's right, Dehne. The moon travels almost 2,300 miles per hour in its orbit. This west to east movement of the moon causes the moon to rise almost an hour later each day. So if the moon rises at 7 p.m. when it's full, it will rise at almost 8 p.m. the following evening.
Speaking of which, we're almost out of time, so how about we pick up where we left off on this topic in 2 weeks?
Sounds good to me, Dehne. And in the meantime, you can practice finding the moon and where it is with respect to the sun.
And it's all there when you keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And on to your sea ice forecast. It looks like the Chukchi Sea is really filling in fairly rapidly now as of the 6th of December. We've got a lot of cold air that's been massing up across the north parts of Asia, and this is sliding south and east toward the Bering Strait and toward the Kotzebue Sound region. That's helping to promote much colder water around the Chukchi Sea and freeze that up. The one thing that's holding it back is the amount of wind that's moving through, and there will be a lot working its way through the Bering Strait and into the northern Bering itself. So we would expect to see colder temperatures. That's not a problem to achieve across most of the Bering. One thing that's going to limit that is the amount of air that's just moving quickly and too fast, in fact, for some areas of ice to form. But you can see more ice around Northern Sound, certainly expanded ice across Kotzebue Sound, and a lot of ice, the pack ice, that's moving south and east toward the Bering Strait. So you can probably look at this and see that changes are happening, and it won't be too long before the Bering Strait is actually closed off. You can check this progress yourself anytime by heading to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. On to southeast, we were talking about that fast-moving storm. It's really going to drag a lot of wind with it. As it does so, storm force winds are going to develop in the region as we go into Friday and Saturday. You can already see winds up to 45 and 50 knots across the outer coast for Friday. Gusts will be on the increase around Stevens Passage, up to about 40 knots there, as you see on Friday. Southeasterlies 15 to as strong as 35 in the region. Northerly winds in the Lynn Canal, and seas across the outer coast up to 26 feet by Friday. We're expecting strong winds to continue through your Saturday as well, 20 to 21 feet in most areas, 22-foot seas outside of Cross Sound all the way up to Prince William Sound. And southeasterlies are building across the Inside Passage for Saturday, looking at 20 to 30 knot winds and 4 to 6-foot seas for Saturday. For South Central, strong winds moving into the northern Gulf there, 40 to 50 knot winds outside of Prince William Sound with seas as high as 24 to 26 feet. Inside of Prince William Sound, 45 knots with a 10-foot sea. North and easterlies coming down Cook Inlet. You'll see those at 30 to 35 with 11 to 15-foot seas as we get into your Friday. More of a westerly shift across the Barrens. Southeasterlies blowing in strong from Resurrection Bay all the way up toward Prince William Sound. 40 to 50 knot winds continue in these areas with 20 to 22-foot seas. The highest seas will be in southeast, though. Look for southeasterlies at 25 knots with a 6-foot sea in Prince William Sound and 4-foot seas in the northern inlet. For southwest, Bristol Bay, you're looking at 35 knots and 10-foot seas, more of a northerly flow as you go down the coast. An offshore wind blowing off of the Alaska Peninsula means onshore winds from Shelikof Strait to Kodiak Island. More of a westerly flow on the eastern side of Kodiak Island there with anywhere from 13 to 14-foot seas in the Pacific. As we get into Saturday, more of a westerly flow is developing for the peninsula, about 25 to 30 knot winds in all areas, 12 to 13-foot seas expected there. Northwesterlies for Kodiak Island. and 6 to 12 foot seas, with the highest on the eastern side or leeward side of Kodiak Island as we go through your Saturday. Northwesterlies are blowing throughout the Bering Sea, and that'll pretty much be the rule for the central and western chain and the eastern end as well. A little bit more of a northerly push there coming into Unalaska and Nikolsky at 25 knots. Most areas 20 to 25, 30 knots west of Adak to Kiska, and you're looking at about 18-foot seas there for Friday. And then you can see the next round of weather coming in with a western southwesterly flow, 35 to 40 knots with 15 to 25-foot seas. Southerly winds for the central chain and westerlies for the eastern chain at 25 knots, 10 to 12-foot seas there. The highest seas certainly forming out west of Kiska to Shemya at 25 feet there for your Saturday. For the west coast, northwesterlies coming in through Macoriac, St. Matthew, St. Paul, St. George, and the Kuskokwim Delta, 30 to 40 knots in most areas. Northerlies through the Bering Strait and over St. Lawrence Island, 14-foot seas expected there, with southeasterlies in the ice-free areas around Norton Sound at 20 knots. Northeasterlies form there on Saturday. Northerlies coming through the Bering Strait will diminish just a little bit. We'll still get more of a west-easterly flow inside the southern Bering, and into the Kuskokwim Delta we go, 25 to 30 there with an 11 to 12-foot sea on Saturday. For the North Slope and the coast, you'll look at westerlies 15 to 20 over the Beaufort sea ice. North and northeasterlies coming into Kotzebue Sound, 35 to 40 there, 9 to 10-foot seas. Through the Bering Strait, you're looking at 14-foot seas with a 35-knot wind on Saturday. Again, northeasterlies coming in off the ice, 25 to 35, with the highest seas outside of Kotzebue Sound at 12 feet. Watch for heavy freezing spray to continue there through the weekend. Recapping tonight's weather, winter storm warnings continue for St. Lawrence Island and the western end of the Bering Strait and the Seward Peninsula. 978 millibar low will be strengthening there, creating plenty of wind, plenty of snow, and poor visibility throughout the remainder of the weekend. A fast-moving storm coming up out of the Pacific will charge up the winds across southeastern Alaska, bringing rain and precipitation to many in the Gulf Coast as winter weather hovers around the Bering Strait through the weekend. Snow in the interior. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.